Hello, welcome back. Session number 5, Developing a Project Management Plan. In this module, we are going to discuss how exactly you could develop a project management plan. The planning process group consists of those processes that establish the scope of the effort, define and refine the objectives, and develop the course of action required to attain those objectives. The processes in this planning process group develop the components of the project management plan and the project documents used to carry out the project. The nature of the project may require the use of repeated feedback for the additional analysis. As more project information or characteristics are gathered and understood, additional planning will likely be required. Significant. In terms of developing a project management plan, there are multiple knowledge areas contributing into it. Let's have a look at them one by one. First, let's talk about the scope management. What kind of activities we do in terms of defining the scope in order to come up with the project management plan for your project. Develop project management plan. Develop project management plan is a process of defining, preparing, and coordinating all plan components and consolidating them into one integrated project management plan. The key benefit of this process is the production of a comprehensive document that defines the basis of all project work and how the work will be performed. Example, you will consider the project charter, output from the other processes, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets in order to build the project management plan. The second thing that you do is plan scope management. Plan scope management is a process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project and project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. The inputs for this particular process are project charter, project management plan, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. The output of this particular process are scope management plan, requirements management plan. Collect requirements. Collect requirements is a process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet objectives. The key benefit of this process is that it provides the basis for defining the product scope and project scope. So this is a very crucial step in order to ensure that you really understand what the client wants you to work on. So this also has many inputs and two primary outputs. The outputs of this particular process are requirements documentation, and requirements traceability matrix. Define scope. Once you collect the requirements, the next activity that you need to do is defining the scope. Define scope is a process of developing a detailed description of the project and the product. The key benefit of this process is that it describes the product, service or result boundaries and acceptance criteria. This process is performed once or at predefined points in the project. The input for this particular process or activity are project charter, project management plan, project documents, enterprise environmental factors, and organization. Creating WBS. WBS stands for Work Breakdown Structure. Create work breakdown structure is the process of subdividing the project deliverables and the project work into smaller, more manageable components. The key benefit of this process is that it provides a framework of what has to be delivered. The input of this particular process are project management plan, project documents, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. The output that this particular process produces are scope baseline, planned schedule management. Planned schedule management is a process of establishing the policies, procedures, and documentation for planning, developing, managing, executing, and controlling the project schedule. The inputs for this particular process are project charter, project management plan, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. There's only one output of this particular process, that is schedule management plan. The next process is define activities. Define activities is a process of identifying and documenting the specific actions to be performed to produce the project deliverables. The input for this particular process are project management plan. You're going to look at your project management plan in creating the activities, enterprise environmental factors, and the organizational process assets. So there are a lot of outputs from this particular process. They're namely activity list. So you will have a list of activities to be carried out in order to achieve the project objectives. The next process is sequence activities. Remember, we talk about the project management plan, developing a project management plan. In order to develop the project management plan, there are a lot of activities. So we are discussing a lot of them, and at this point what we talk about is the sequence activities. So after listing down the activities, you need to arrange the activities in the right sequence. Sequence activities is a process of identifying and documenting relationships among the project activities. The key benefit of this process is that it defines the logical sequence of work to be obtained, the greatest efficiency. Estimate activity durations. Estimate activity duration is the process of estimating the number of work periods needed to complete individual activities with the estimated resources. Now remember, so after listing down the activities, arranging them in the right sequence, the next step is to estimate them. The key benefit of this particular process is that it provides the amount of time each activity will take to complete. So it's absolutely needed for you to do a schedule forecast. The input for this particular process are project management plan, project documents, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational. The next process involved in developing a project management plan is develop schedule. Develop schedule is a process of analyzing the activity sequences, durations, resource requirements, and schedule constraints to create a schedule model for project execution and monitoring and control. So as you see, there are 5 inputs: project management plan, project documents, agreements, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. The outputs are numerous here. There are 7 outputs produced at the end of the development. Now, in terms of developing a project management plan, you also need to consider the cost management perspective. It's another knowledge area within PMBOK, which is also valid for any other framework like Prince2. So in terms of costing, you need to do certain activities or processes to develop your project management plan. Let's have a look at what they are. Plan cost management. Just like you plan the scope, you also need to plan the costing. Plan cost management is a process of defining how the project's cost will be estimated, budgeted, managed, monitored, and controlled. The key benefit of this process is that it provides a guidance and direction on how the project cost will be managed throughout the project. Estimate cost. Estimate cost is the process of developing an approximation of the monetary resources needed to complete project work. It's absolutely essential to do estimate the cost involved in your project implementation. The key benefit of this process is that it determines the monetary resources required for the project. Therefore, you can complete your planning, allocating the right resources for your project implementation. Now let's have a look at determine budget process. Determine budget process is the process of aggregating estimated cost of individual activities or work packages to establish an authorized cost baseline. The key benefit of this process is that it determines a cost baseline against which the project performance can be monitored and controlled. Resource management. Out of many knowledge areas that you need to manage in developing a project management plan, resource management becomes a critical knowledge area to manage. Let's have a look at planned resource management process. Planned resource management process is the process of defining how to estimate, acquire, manage, and utilize physical and human resources. The key benefit of this process is that it establishes the approach and the level of management effort needed for managing project resources based on the type and complexity of the project. It's absolutely essential that you plan your resources. Once you complete plan project resources, the next process that you need to work on is estimate activity resources. Estimate activity resources is the process of estimating team resources and the type and the quantities of materials, equipment, and supplies necessary to perform project work. The key benefit of this process is that it defines the type, quantity, and characteristics of resources required to complete the project. So it's absolutely essential to estimate the resources that you have identified for your project implementation. Well done. So far we have discussed quite a lot of processes contributing to the creation of the project management plan. Out of the things that we discussed, we mainly focused our attention on scope management, cost management, resource management, and schedule management. In addition to these knowledge areas, there are other knowledge areas that you need to pay attention. Some of them are quality management, communication management, risk management, and stakeholder management. During this particular program, we will talk about most of these knowledge areas in detail.